In the harsh winter of rural Montana, 28-year-old Sarah Chen, a young widow still grieving the loss of her husband Michael, who died in Afghanistan 2 years ago, lives alone in their remote cabin. One brutal December night, she discovers a massive, nearly frozen dog collapsed near her woodshed, a creature so large it seems almost supernatural. Despite her limited resources and the danger of harboring what appears to be a wolf hybrid, Sarah takes the animal in. What she doesn't know is that this dog, bearing strange scars and an unusual collar with cryptic military markings, is Titan, a highly trained military working dog who served alongside her late husband in his final mission. The dog has traveled over 8,000 miles, following an impossible journey home to fulfill a promise Michael made before he died, to bring Titan to Sarah if anything happened to him. As their bond deepens through the winter, Sarah will discover not only the truth about Titan's identity, but also uncover the real story of Michael's last days, a truth that will shatter everything she believed about his death and ultimately lead to a revelation that will change both their lives forever. The shotgun trembled in Sarah Chen's hands as she stared at the massive shadow sprawled across her snow-covered yard. It wasn't moving, but it was enormous, larger than any wolf she'd ever heard about in these Montana mountains. The beam from her flashlight caught two things that made her blood run cold: the creature's labored breathing, creating small clouds in the -20 air, and the dark stain spreading beneath it into the pristine snow. Blood, so much blood. "Don't be stupid, Sarah," she whispered to herself, her late left Michael's voice echoing in her memory. "Never approach a wounded predator. They're most dangerous when they're dying." But something made her step closer, her boots crunching through the fresh powder that had been falling for 3 days straight. The worst blizzard Montana had seen in a decade. The radio had said, "Nothing should be out here. Nothing could survive out here." Another step, another. She saw it, a collar. What kind of wild animal wore a collar? Sarah had been alone for exactly 7. She knew the number, because she marked each one in the journal Michael had given her for their last anniversary. Before his deployment, before the explosion that took him and 3 others in his unit in some valley in Afghanistan she couldn't even pronounce. The cabin had been their dream. 20 acres of wilderness, 40 minutes from the nearest town, completely off-grid, except for the solar panels Michael had installed the summer before he left. "A little piece of heaven," he'd called it, spinning her around in the empty living room the day they'd closed on it. "Where we'll raise our kids someday, where we'll grow old together." Now it was just her, the howling wind, and whatever was dying in her yard. She'd been preparing for bed when she heard it. A sound like thunder, but wrong somehow. Metallic, like something heavy hitting her woodshed. Living alone had made her paranoid about sounds. Every creak could be an intruder. Every scratch could be a bear trying to break into her supplies. But this sound had been different. Final, like something had given up. That's when she'd grabbed Michael's Remington from above the fireplace and ventured out into the storm. Now, standing 10 feet from the creature, she could see it clearly in her flashlight beam. It was a dog. But what a dog! Its shoulder would probably reach her waist if its coat was thick and dark, maybe black or deep brown, though it was hard to tell with all the ice and blood matted in its fur. German shepherd markings, but wrong. Too big, mixed with something else. Something that belonged in fairy tales about wolves that could swallow the moon. The blood was coming from its left side, 3 deep gashes that looked like they'd been made by claws. Bear, maybe, or mountain lion. The dog must have been in a fight and lost. But what really caught her attention was how thin it was beneath all that fur. She could see its ribs, the hollow spaces between them. This animal hadn't just been in a fight, it had been starving for weeks. "Hey," she said softly, lowering the shotgun. "Hey there." One eye opened, just barely. The eye was amber, almost golden in the flashlight beam, and filled with an intelligence that made her stomach flip. This wasn't some feral beast. This was someone's dog, or had been, once. She took another step closer, and the dog made a sound, not quite a growl, more like a sigh of resignation, as if it was saying, "Do what you have to do. I'm too tired to fight. I'm not going to hurt you," Sarah heard herself say. It was in the rational part of her brain, the part that sounded like Michael's safety lectures, was screaming at her to go back inside, lock the door, and let nature take its course. This dog was massive. If it recovered, it could kill her easily. She had no idea if it was aggressive, diseased, or dangerous. But the other part of her, the part that had been slowly freezing to death in this cabin for 742 days, recognized something in that amber eye: loneliness, loss, the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying grief too heavy for one body to bear. "I'm going to help you," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "But you have to let me. Can you do that? Can you trust me?" The dog's eye closed again, but its breathing seemed to steady slightly. That was answer enough. Sarah ran back to the cabin, her mind racing. She needed blankets, first aid supplies, and somehow she needed to move what had to be a 150-pound dog into shelter. The woodshed would have to do. It was insulated enough, and closer than trying to drag the animal all the way to the cabin. She gathered everything she could think of: old quilts, the extensive first aid kit Michael had insisted on, a bowl of warm water, and after a moment's hesitation, the leftover stew she'd made for dinner. If the dog was starving, it would need food, though she'd have to be careful not to give too much too fast. It took her nearly an hour to move the dog. She'd wrapped it in blankets and used one as a makeshift sled, dragging it inch by painful inch through the snow to the woodshed. The dog had whimpered once, when she'd had to lift its injured side, and the sound had nearly broken her heart. But it hadn't snapped at her, hadn't even shown its teeth. It seemed to understand she was trying to help. The woodshed was small but dry, and she'd managed to create a bed of sorts from old blankets and a tarp. By the light of a battery-powered lantern, she could finally see the extent of the injuries. The gashes were deep but clean, already starting to clot in the cold. There were other scars too, older ones, across the dog's muzzle and chest. This animal had seen violence before. She cleaned the wounds as best she could with warm water and antiseptic from the first aid kit. The dog flinched but didn't pull away. When she offered it small pieces of meat from the stew, it ate slowly, carefully, its eyes never leaving her face. "Where did you come from?" she asked, more to fill the silence than expecting an answer. "What happened to you?" That's when she noticed the collar again. It was thick leather, military grade from the look of it, with a metal plate where tags should be. She leaned closer, trying to read what was engraved there, but the metal was scratched and worn. She could make out what might be numbers and letters, but nothing that made sense, except her heart stopped. At the bottom of the plate, barely visible, were two letters that made her hands shake. MC Michael Chen. "No," she whispered. That's impossible," but even as she said it, she was looking at the dog with new eyes. Michael had mentioned the military working dogs in his letters. He'd even sent a photo once, him kneeling next to a massive German shepherd-looking dog, both of them in full gear, both of them smiling, or what passed for smiling, with the dog. He'd never mentioned the dog's name in his letters. Operational security, he'd said, but he'd talked about how smart it was, how loyal, how it had saved his unit more than once. The dog in the photo had been big, but normal big. Military working dog big. Not this big. But then again, that photo had been taken over 2 years ago, and if this was the same dog, "How did you get here?" she asked, reaching out slowly to touch the collar again. "How did you find me?" The dog's eyes were closed now, its breathing deep and even. Exhausted but alive. She pulled one more blanket over it, made sure the water bowl was within reach, and stood to leave. She'd check on it again in a few hours. If it survived the night, She'd figure out what to do in the morning. But as she reached the door of the woodshed, she heard it, a sound so soft, she almost missed it. A whine, almost like a word. And though she knew it was impossible, though she knew she was projecting, she could have sworn it sounded like my. Sarah froze in the doorway, her hand on the rough wood frame. The rational part of her brain said she was hallucinating, that grief and isolation were playing tricks on her. Dogs didn't speak. Dogs didn't travel thousands of miles to find the widows of soldiers they'd served with. But when she turned back, the dog's eyes were open again, watching her with that unsettling intelligence. And around its neck, the collar with Michael's initials seemed to gleam in the lantern light. "I'll be back," she promised, not sure if she was talking to the dog or to the ghost of her husband that seemed to hover in the cold air between them. "I'll be back soon." She closed the shed door against the howling wind and stumbled back to the cabin, her mind spinning with impossibility. In the kitchen, she pulled out the box she'd hidden in the back of the closet, the one with Michael's letters, his photos, the flag from his funeral. Her hands shook as she rifled through them, looking for that photo with the dog. There it was, Michael in his combat gear, kneeling in the dirt somewhere in Afghanistan, his arm around a large German Shepherd-type dog. She looked closer at the photo, then grabbed a magnifying glass from the drawer. The dog's collar in the photo, it was the same type, military-ish, and though the photo was small and slightly blurry, she could see something on the collar's metal plate. She ran back to the woodshed, photo in hand, her feet sliding on the icy path. The dog looked up when she entered, alert despite its injuries. Sarah knelt beside it, holding the photo up to compare. The facial markings were similar, but not identical, though that could be age, injury, or the poor light. But the collar, she gently turned the metal plate to catch the lantern light better. There were more markings she hadn't seen before, worn almost smooth. A unit number, the same as Michael's, a service number she recognized from his paperwork, and at the top, so faint she had to trace it with her finger to be sure. "Titan," she said aloud, and the dog's tail, what she could see of it under the blankets, thumped once against the floor. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You're Titan. You're Michael's dog." But that raised more questions than it answered. The official letter had said Michael died in an IED explosion, along with 3 other members of his unit. There had been no survivors. So how was his military working dog here in Montana, 2 years later? And more importantly, why? The dog Titan was watching her with those intelligent amber eyes, and she had the strangest feeling that he had been looking for her. That he had traveled God knows how far or for how long specifically to find her. "What happened over there?" she asked. "What really happened to Michael?" Titan just watched her, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and something else. Secrets, maybe, or promises, the kind that even a dog would cross the world to keep. Sarah stayed with him until dawn, talking softly about nothing and everything, about Michael, about the cabin, about the loneliness that had settled into her bones like winter cold. And Titan listened, his breathing gradually becoming stronger, his eyes more alert. When the first pale light of sunrise filtered through the shed's small window, she finally saw him clearly, the full extent of his size, his injuries, his obvious military training in the way he held himself even while injured. But more than that, she saw purpose in his eyes. Whatever had brought him here, whatever impossible journey he had made, it wasn't over yet. "Okay," she said, making a decision that would change everything. "You can stay. We'll figure this out together." Titan's tail thumped again, stronger this time, and Sarah could have sworn, though she'd never tell anyone, that in that moment, she felt Michael's presence in the shed with them, as real and warm as the sunrise breaking through the storm. The next 3 days passed in a blur of routine that Sarah hadn't experienced since Michael died. Having something to care for, something that needed her, pulled her out of the grey fog she'd been living in. Titan, she was certain it was him now, was recovering faster than she'd expected. Military dogs were tough. Michael had always said they were bred and trained to survive what would kill ordinary dogs. By the morning of the 4th day, Titan was able to stand, though he favored his injured side. Sarah had moved him into the cabin's mudroom, convincing herself it was just practical. Easier to tend his wounds, warmer for recovery. But the truth was, she needed him close. His presence filled a void in the cabin that she hadn't even realized was killing her slowly. "You need proper medical attention," she told him as she changed his bandages. The wounds were healing, but she wasn't a vet. Dr. Patterson in town would. Titan's low growl cut her off. It wasn't aggressive, more like communication. Every time she mentioned going to town, calling someone or getting help, he made that same sound, as if he was saying, "No, not yet, not safe." It should have frightened her, this massive dog's clear intelligence and apparent paranoia. Instead, it intrigued her. What had happened to make a military dog so wary of outside contact? She was pondering this while making breakfast, scrambled eggs with extra portions for Titan, when she noticed him standing by the bookshelf in the living room. He was staring at something, his whole body tense with focus. Sarah followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. It was their wedding photo, her and Michael, at the courthouse in Helena, both of them laughing at something the justice of the peace had said. She'd almost hidden it after the funeral, finding it too painful to see every day, but hiding it felt like betrayal, so it stayed. "That's us," she said softly. "Our wedding day. Michael said he wanted to marry me before deployment, said he couldn't leave without making me his wife." Titan padded closer to the photo, his nose almost touching the frame. Then he did something that made Sarah's knees weak. He sat, perfect military position, and raised one paw to touch the frame, exactly where Michael's face was in the photo. "You really knew him," she whispered. It wasn't a question anymore. Titan turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that looked impossibly like grief. "Do dogs mourn?" She'd read they could, but this seemed deeper somehow, human almost. That's when she noticed something else. Titan's collar had shifted while he slept, and underneath it, partially hidden by his thick fur, were more scars. But these weren't from claws or teeth. They were too precise, too deliberate. "Can I?" she asked, reaching for the collar. Titan held perfectly still as she gently parted his fur, to examine the scars. What she found made her stomach turn. These were surgical scars, multiple ones, across his neck and upper chest. But mixed among them were other marks. Burns, maybe, or she'd seen enough war movies to recognize what might be torture marks. "My God, what did they do to you?" The front door creaked in the wind, making both of them jump. Titan immediately positioned himself between Sarah and the door, his hackles raised, despite his injuries. It was just as wind. The latch had been loose for months, but his reaction was telling. This wasn't normal watchdog behavior. This was protection detail behavior. After securing the door, Sarah returned to find Titan lying by the fireplace, but his eyes tracked her every movement. She sat beside him with her coffee, pulling out her laptop for the first time in weeks. If Titan was really Michael's military working dog, there had to be records, news, something. She started with Michael's unit designation and the date of his death. The official reports were minimal. 4 soldiers killed in an IED explosion during a routine patrol in Helmand province. No mention of a military working dog. She dug deeper, searching through military forums, veteran social media groups, anywhere that might have information. Then she found a small mention in a tribute post from someone in Michael's unit who had rotated home a month before the incident. He'd posted a photo of the whole squad, including Michael and Titan. The caption read, "Missing my brothers and the best MWD in the service. Titan saved our asses more times than I can count." But according to this post, dated just 3 months after Michael's death, Titan was listed as MIA, missing in action, not KIA. The soldier mentioned something about Titan disappearing during the explosion aftermath. Body never recovered. "You survived," Sarah said, looking at the dog. "You survived, but then where have you been for 2 years?" She kept searching, following digital breadcrumbs through military channels and news reports. There were whispers, Fragments of story. A dog matching Titan's description spotted at various military installations across the Middle East. Reports of a ghost dog that would appear at forward operating bases, stay for a few days, then disappear. One Marine's blog post claimed a massive dog had warned them about an ambush, saving 6 lives, before vanishing into the desert. The timeline was sporadic, but suggested a journey, Afghanistan to Pakistan through Iran, how Turkey, Eastern Europe, like Titan had been making his way steadily west, steadily toward home. A knock at the door shattered her concentration. Real this time, not wind. 3 precise raps. Titan was on his feet instantly, that low growl building in his chest. Not his warning growl. This was different, dangerous. "Who is it?" Sarah called, grabbing the shotgun from its place by the door. "Mrs. Chen, my name is Colonel James Harrison. I served with your husband." Sarah's blood went cold. In 2 years, no one from Michael's unit had contacted her beyond the official condolence letter. "Why now? What do you want?" "I need to speak with you about something that may have come into your possession recently. Something that belonged to your husband." Titan's growl grew louder. Sarah noticed he was positioning himself again, ready to attack despite his wounds. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. There was a pause. Then, "Mrs. Chen, we have satellite footage of you helping a large dog 4 nights ago. That dog is military property, very valuable military property that went missing 2 years ago. You've been watching me." "The dog has a tracking chip, Mrs. Chen. It activated when you brought him inside. The warmth restarted the battery. We know he's there. We just want to collect him peacefully." Sarah looked at Titan. His amber eyes were locked on the door. Every muscle. Whatever this was, whoever this Colonel Harrison really was, Titan clearly didn't trust him. "Show me identification," she said. "Slide it under the door." Another pause. "Mrs. Chen, you're making this unnecessarily difficult." That's when she knew. Real military wouldn't hesitate to show ID. Real military would have called ahead, gone through proper channels. Whoever was on the other side of that door, they weren't here officially. "I'm calling the police," she announced, pulling out her phone. "I wouldn't do that." The voice had changed, colder now. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. That dog has information we need. Information about what really happened to your husband." Sarah's finger hesitated over the emergency call button. "What do you mean?" "Your husband didn't die in an IED explosion, Mrs. Chen. He was murdered by someone in his own unit. Someone who's still active, still operational. And that dog is the only witness." The words hit her like physical blows. "Murdered? Someone in his unit? You're lying. The dog has been surgically modified, Mrs. Chen. Experimental technology. Everything he's seen and heard for the past 3 years is stored in a chip in his skull, including your husband's real death, including the identity of his killer." Sarah's mind reeled. The surgical scars on Netan's neck and head, his incredible intelligence, his impossible journey home. "If that's true," she said slowly, "then why should I trust you? How do I know you're not the killer?" Silence. Then the sound of multiple footsteps on her porch. "Because, Mrs. Chen," the voice said, all pretense of friendliness gone, "if I were the killer, I wouldn't be asking nicely." The doorknob rattled. They were trying to pick the lock. Titan looked at her. And in that moment, she saw something that defied explanation. He moved to the back door, then looked back at her, clearly saying, "We need to go. Now." Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the go bag Michael had always insisted she keep. Cash, documents, basic supplies, and her truck keys. The doorknob was turning now. They'd gotten through the lock. She threw open the back door, and she and Titan ran into the snow-covered forest behind the cabin. Behind them, she heard the front door crash open and voices shouting. But she didn't look back. She ran beside Titan, who, despite his injuries, was setting a pace through the trees like he knew exactly where he was going. 20 minutes later, hidden in a cave Michael had shown her during one of their hikes. Sarah caught her breath while Titan stood guard at the entrance. Her truck was back at the cabin, probably already disabled. Her phone was off. If they could track Titan's chip, they could track her phone. She was alone in the Montana wilderness in winter, with an injured dog and unknown pursuers who claimed to have answers about Michael's death. "What did Michael tell you?" she asked Titan. "What did he want you to do?" Titan turned from the cave entrance and approached her. He sat directly in front of her, and then did something extraordinary. He raised his paw and placed it over her heart, holding it there. The gesture was so human, so clearly intentional, that tears sprang to her eyes. Then he stood and moved to the cave wall, where he began pawing at a specific spot. Sarah watched, confused, until she realized he was trying to show her something. She moved closer and saw what looked like scratches in the rock. But as she examined them in the dim light filtering into the cave, she realized they weren't random. They were coordinates, GPS coordinates, and below them, scratched in Michael's distinctive handwriting, "If lost, go here." Michael was here, she gasped. But when? He never mentioned Saman, she remembered. 3 months before deployment, Michael had gone on a solo camping trip to clear his head. He'd been gone for 3 days, coming back calmer, but somehow sadder. He'd said he needed to prepare himself mentally for leaving. But what if he'd been preparing for something else? What if he'd known something might happen to him? Sarah memorized the coordinates. They pointed to a location about 50 miles north, deeper into the mountains. Getting there without a vehicle would be nearly impossible, especially with Titan injured and presumably hunters on their trail. A branch cracked outside the cave. Titan's head snapped toward the entrance, his body going rigid. Someone was coming. Sarah gripped the shotgun tighter, knowing it wouldn't be much use against multiple armed professionals. But she'd go down fighting if she had to. For Michael, for for the truth. Whatever it was, a figure appeared at the cave entrance, backlit by the winter sun. Sarah raised the shotgun, but Titan did something unexpected. His tail wagged. Just once, but it was enough to make her pause. "Easy there, Sarah," a familiar voice said. "It's me." The figure stepped into the cave, and Sarah's shotgun clattered to the ground. It was Ben Rodriguez, Michael's best friend from high school. The one who'd joined the Marines while Michael went Army. The one who'd been reported killed in action 6 months before Michael's death. "Hello, Sarah," Ben said, his face gaunt and scarred, but unmistakably alive. "We need to talk about Michael, and we need to move. They'll find this cave within the hour." "You're dead," she whispered. "Your funeral, I was there." "I know," Ben said, kneeling to let Titan smell his hand. The dog accepted him immediately, even leaning into his touch. "It's a long story, but right now, we need to get you both somewhere safe. Michael made me promise to protect you if anything happened. I'm sorry it took me this long to keep that promise." Michael knew. Sarah's voice broke. He knew someone was going to kill him. Ben's face darkened. He knew someone in his unit was dirty, selling information to the Taliban. He was close to exposing them when he stopped, looking at Titan. When they killed him and made it look like an IED, Titan saw everything. That's why they've been hunting him. And now that he's found you, they'll kill you both to keep the secret. "Who?" Sarah demanded. "Who killed my husband?" Before Ben could answer, they heard voices outside. Multiple voices, getting closer. "Later," Ben said, pulling out a pistol. "Can you ride?" "Ride what?" Ben smiled grimly. "Brought horses, 3 of them. Old school, but no tracking chips. And can handle this terrain better than vehicles. Think you can make 50 miles? Sarah looked at Titan, who was already moving toward the cave entrance despite his injuries, ready to protect her, ready to finish whatever mission Michael had given him. "Yes," she said, grabbing her pack. "Let's go." As they slipped out the back of the cave and into the deeper forest where Ben had hidden the horses, Sarah realized her life of quiet grief was over. She was now part of something larger, A conspiracy that had killed her husband, faked at least one death, and turned a military dog into a living recording device. But she was also closer to Michael than she'd been in 2 years. Following his clues, protected by his dog, helped by his friend, it was as if he'd planned all of this, set up an elaborate fail-safe in case the worst happened. "I'm coming, Michael," she whispered as she mounted one of the horses, Titan, keeping pace beside them, despite his injuries. "I'm going to find out what happened to you. I promise." Behind them, shouts erupted from the cave. They'd been found, but they were already disappearing into the wilderness. 3 riders and a dog, heading toward coordinates that might finally reveal the truth about Sergeant Michael Chen's death. The horses moved through the snow-laden forest with surprising grace, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Sarah had ridden as a child, but never like this. Never with armed men hunting her, never with her life depending on every careful step through the treacherous mountain terrain. Ben led them along paths that seemed invisible to her eyes, game trails and old logging routes that avoided the main roads where their pursuers would be watching. Titan kept pace despite his injuries, his dark form weaving between the trees like a shadow. Every few minutes he would pause, ears swiveling, testing the air, then give a soft huff that Ben seemed to understand meant, "All clear." It was a language they'd developed. Sarah realized the communication between soldier and military working dog that transcended words. They rode in silence for 3 hours before Ben finally raised his hand, signaling a stop near a frozen creek. The horses needed water, and they all needed rest. Sarah's thighs burned from gripping the saddle, and she could see Titan favoring his injured side more heavily now, though he tried to hide it. "We can talk here," Ben said quietly, scanning the tree line with practiced eye. "Sound doesn't carry well near running water, and we're in a dead zone for cell towers. Even satellite surveillance is tricky with this tree cover." Sarah slid off her horse, her legs nearly buckling. "Start talking. Start with why everyone thinks you're dead." Ben pulled out a thermos from his saddlebag, pouring hot coffee that steamed in the cold air. His hands, Sarah noticed, were covered in burn scars. 6 months before Michael died, I was embedded with a Special Forces unit in Kandahar. Officially, I was providing translation services. I'd picked up Pashto and Dari during my tours. Unofficially, I was investigating rumors of information leaks that were getting soldiers killed. He handed her the coffee and she wrapped her cold fingers around it gratefully. "I found the source," he continued. "A network of soldiers and contractors, selling patrol routes, base vulnerabilities, even personal information about high-value personnel to the highest bidder. When I tried to report it, my vehicle hit an IED, except it wasn't really an IED. It was a targeted hit, made to look like one. But you survived." "Barely." Ben pulled down his collar, revealing extensive scarring across his neck and chest. "A local family found me, hid me for weeks. By the time I was conscious enough to understand what had happened, I was officially dead. The people who tried to kill me thought they'd succeeded. I decided to let them keep thinking that while I gathered evidence." "And Michael?" Ben's face darkened. Michael figured it out independently. He noticed patterns, missions going wrong, ambushes that shouldn't have been possible, information that only someone inside could have provided. He started documenting everything, building a case. Ben paused, looking at Titan. "She even volunteered Titan for that experimental program to gather proof." "The recording chip," Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. "Michael knew they were developing it. More than that, he helped design the parameters, made sure Titan would record everything, not just what the handlers wanted. The visual, audio, even biometric data from anyone Titan came in close contact with. Michael turned Titan into a walking surveillance system that couldn't be hacked, couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be bought. Titan had moved closer to them during the conversation, and now he rested his massive head on Sarah's knee, his amber eyes watching Ben intently. "Michael contacted me through back channels 2 weeks before he died," Ben continued. Told me he was close to exposing everything. He had names, dates, financial records, but he knew they were onto him, so he made contingency plans. The coordinates, Sarah breathed. Among other things, Michael was brilliant, Sarah. He knew if they killed him, they'd try to destroy all evidence. So he scattered it, some with me, some in locations only he knew about. And the most damning evidence, he gestured to Titan, in a dog's head, where no one would think to look. Who killed him, Ben? Who actually killed my husband? Ben was about to answer when Titan suddenly stood, his hackles raised, a low growl building in his chest. Ben had his weapon out instantly, scanning the tray line. How many? He asked Titan, as if expecting an answer. Titan pawed the ground twice. 2 contacts, Ben translated, probably scouts. He turned to Sarah. Can you shoot? Michael taught me. Good. Take the rifle from my saddle. We're about to have company. But before Sarah could move, a voice called out from the trees. Ben Rodriguez. We know you're there. We just want to talk. Sarah recognized the voice. Not Colonel Harrison from her cabin, but someone younger. Familiar somehow. That's close enough, Carter. Ben called back, confirming Sarah's suspicion. She knew that name. Staff Sergeant James Carter. He'd written her a condolence letter after Michael's death, had even called once to share stories about Michael's bravery. 2 figures emerged from the trees, hands visible but clearly armed. Carter looked older than the photos she'd seen, weathered by 2 more years of war. Beside him was a woman in tactical gear, blonde hair pulled back, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Hello, Sarah, Carter said, his voice gentle. I'm sorry about all this, about the deception at your cabin. We had to be sure you actually had Titan. You were at my cabin. Sarah asked, confused. No, that was Harrison's team. We've been tracking them, trying to get to you first. Carter took a step closer, but stopped when Titan snarled. Easy, boy. I'm one of the good guys, remember? I gave you those beef treats in Kandahar. Titan's growl didn't diminish. He remembers all right, Ben said coldly. He remembers everything, including what you did the night Michael died. Carter's face went pale. That's not... Ben, you don't understand. I tried to save him. I tried to warn him. Warn him about what? Sarah demanded, standing despite her shaking legs. What happened that night? The blonde woman spoke for the first time. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Dana Foster, Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division. We've been investigating your husband's death for 18 months. Carter came to us with information, but we need Titan's recordings to prove it. She's lying, Ben said flatly. CID closed Michael's case, called it a combat casualty. Officially, yes, Foster admitted. Unofficially, we've been building a case against Colonel Harrison and his network. Carter is our inside source. Sarah's head spun. Who to trust? Ben, who'd faked his death to investigate. Carter, who claimed to be helping but whom Titan clearly distrusted. This Lieutenant Foster, who appeared out of nowhere. Prove it, she said finally. Prove you're really CI. Foster slowly reached into her jacket and pulled out credentials, tossing them to Ben. He examined them carefully, even holding them up to the light. They look real, he admitted grudgingly. But papers can be faked. Then how about this? Foster pulled out a tablet, showing a videos. It was grainy surveillance footage from a forward operating base. Sarah recognized Michael immediately, saw him walking with Titan toward a vehicle. Then another figure appeared. Colonel Harrison. There was no audio, but the body language was clear. An argument. Harrison grabbing Michael's arm, Michael shaking him off. This was 3 hours before the patrol where Michael died, Foster explained. Harrison ordered him on that patrol specifically, changed the route at the last minute, and made sure Michael's vehicle was in the lead position. That's not proof of murder, Ben said, but his voice was less certain. No, Carter said quietly, but I can tell you what happened next, because I was there. He looked directly at Sarah, and she saw tears in his eyes. I was in the vehicle behind Michael. Harrison told me it was a routine patrol, but I knew something was wrong. The route made no sense. It was a known IED hotspot that we'd cleared the day before. No reason to go back unless you wanted someone to hit an IED that was planted overnight, then finished. Carter nodded miserably. I tried to radio Michael, warn him, but Harrison had disabled the comm between our vehicles, made it look like a malfunction. I watched Michael's vehicle approach the kill zone, and I couldn't do anything. But then Titan, God, that dog, he started going crazy, barking, refusing to move forward. Michael trusted him, started to reverse, but it was too late. The IED went off. But here's the thing, it went off behind them. If they'd continued forward as planned, it would have been a direct hit. No survivors. But Michael survived the initial blast, Foster added. The medical report shows he was alive for several minutes after. Long enough to tell Titan something. Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. He gave Titan a final command. We think so, Foster confirmed. And whatever that command was, Titan has been following it ever since, including recording everything he sees and hears and making his way to you. But Harrison doesn't know about the recording capability, Ben said slowly. He thinks Titan is just a dog who might have witnessed something. Exactly. But when our tech team detected Titan's chip going active at your cabin, Harrison's team detected it too. They just don't know what the chip really does. They think it's just a tracking device. Sarah looked at Titan, who had remained rigidly focused on Carter throughout the conversation. You don't trust him, she said to the dog. Why? Carter's face crumbled. Because I didn't do enough. I could have refused the patrol, could have done something more. I let Harrison manipulate me, use my vehicle as cover for the backup team that was supposed to confirm the kill. Titan knows I was a coward. Or, Ben said thoughtfully, Titan knows something else about you, something you haven't told us. The tension in the clearing ratcheted up another notch. Foster's hand drifted toward her weapon. Carter looked genuinely confused. I've told you everything, Carter insisted. I came forward, risked everything to expose Harrison. Titan moved so fast that no one could react. One moment he was standing beside Sarah, the next he had Carter on the ground, his massive jaws around the man's throat, but not biting down, just holding, warning. Don't shoot, Foster shouted, her weapon half drawn. Titan, what are you doing? Sarah asked, but the dog's eyes never left Carter's face. That's when she saw it. Carter's hand had been reaching for something in his boot, a hidden weapon. Slowly, Ben said, his gun now trained on Carter. Whatever you were reaching for, pull it out slowly. Carter, with Titan's teeth still at his throat, slowly withdrew a small device from his boot. It looked like a phone but smaller, more robust. Emergency beacon, Foster breathed. You were calling Harrison here. You're with them, Sarah said, the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. You've been with them all along. Carter's eyes hardened, all pretense of remorse vanishing. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is bigger than one dead sergeant. This is about national security, about operations that keep America safe. Sometimes soldiers have to die to protect those operations. Michael found out about more than just the information selling, didn't he? Ben said. He found out about the black sites, the unauthorized operations, the war crimes. Carter laughed bitterly, Titan's teeth still at his throat. War crimes? We were winning. We were doing what needed to be done while bureaucrats in Washington tied our hands with rules of engagement. Harrison had vision. He had the courage to do what others wouldn't. Like murder his own men? Sarah asked. Like eliminate threats to operational security. Your husband couldn't leave well enough alone. He had to be the hero, had to follow the rules. He would have destroyed years of work, gotten dozens of assets killed, all for his precious conscience. Foster had her weapon out now, trained on Carter. Staff Sergeant Carter, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, treason. And the shot came from the trees. Foster spun and fell, blood spreading across the snow. More shots followed, bark exploding from trees around them. Harrison's team had found them. Go, Ben shouted, returning fire. Get to the coordinates. Sarah grabbed Titan's collar, pulling him off Carter, who immediately rolled away and disappeared into the trees. She ran for the horses, but they had bolted at the gunfire. Ben continued laying down, covering fire, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. This way, Ben shouted, grabbing the wounded Foster and throwing her over his shoulder. Into the creek, they plunged into the icy water, the cold shocking Sarah's sister, but it was shallow enough to run through, and the banks provided some cover. Bullets whined overhead as they stumbled through the freezing stream, Titan leading the way as if he knew exactly where they were going. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Ben pulled them up onto the opposite bank, into a dense thicket. Foster was unconscious but breathing, her blood turning the snow pink. "We need to stop the bleeding," Sarah said, pulling out the first aid kit from her pack. "No time," Ben gasped, reloading his weapon. "They'll follow our blood trail. We maybe have 5 minutes." "The coordinates," Sarah said suddenly. "How far are we?" Ben pulled out a GPS device, his frozen fingers fumbling with the buttons. 3 miles, but Foster can't make it that far. "Then we make a stand here," Sarah said, checking the shotgun she'd managed to keep hold of. "No," Foster whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "You have to get Titan to those coordinates. Whatever Michael hid there, it's the key to everything." She pressed something into Sarah's hand, a flash drive on a chain. "Everything I've gathered, names, dates, financial records, combined with Titan's recordings. We can't leave you," Sarah protested. "I'll buy you time," Foster said, struggling to sit up. "My team knows where I am. They'll come." She pulled out her radio, speaking in code that meant nothing to Sarah but made Ben nod. 10 minutes until extraction," he translated. "Can you hold that long?" Foster managed a weak smile. "I didn't survive 3 tours to die in Montana. Go. Finish what Michael started." They heard voices approaching, Harrison's team following their trail through the creek. "Titan," Foster said, looking at the dog. "Protect her. Complete your mission." Titan moved to Foster, touched his nose to her hand briefly. A goodbye, then to Sarah, his message clear. Time to go. They ran. Through the forest, up steep inclines that left Sarah gasping in the thin mountain air, across frozen meadows where they were exposed but could make better time. Behind them they heard gunfire, Foster making her stand, then silence. The coordinates led them to what looked like an abandoned ranger station, half collapsed from years of heavy snow. Sarah wouldn't have given it a second glance, but Titan went straight to a specific corner, pawing at the floorboards. Ben helped her pry up the boards, revealing a metal box, wrapped in waterproof material. Inside was a laptop, more flash drives, papers, and Sarah's heart clenched, a letter addressed to her in Mimel's handwriting. "Later," Ben said urgently. "We need to see what's on that laptop." The computer booted up, asking for a password. Sarah tried their anniversary, Michael's birthday, various combinations that meant something to them. Nothing worked. Then she looked at Titan. "What did he call you? Not your official name. Your nickname." She remembered suddenly, from one of Michael's letters. He'd mentioned that Titan had a secret nickname, something only Michael called him when they were alone. He'd said he'd tell her when he got home. "He never told me," she said, despair washing over her. Titan moved forward, his nose touching the laptop keyboard. He pawed at specific keys, slowly, deliberately. "Buddy." "Buddy?" Sarah typed it in. The laptop unlocked. The screen filled with files, videos, documents, evidence of a conspiracy that went all the way up the chain of command. Arms dealing, murder, torture, theft of military resources. And at the center of it all, Colonel Harrison and a network of corrupt officers and contractors. "This is it," Ben breathed. "This is everything we need." But then they heard it. Helicopters, multiple helicopters. Approaching fast. Harrison, Sarah asked. Ben listened to the rotor sound, his face grim. No. Worse. These are Black Ops birds. No markings, no accountability. They're going to clean this up permanently. Sarah looked at the laptop at Titan, at the evidence Michael had died to protect. How do we get this out? How do we make sure people see it? Foster's team then started, then stopped. They had no way to know if Foster was alive, if her backup was really coming, if anyone would believe them, even with the evidence. That's when Titan did something unexpected. He moved to another corner of the station and began digging through debris. He emerged with something in his mouth, a satellite phone wrapped in plastic. "Michael, you genius," Ben said, grabbing the phone. It was still charged, still functional. He dialed a number from memory. "This is Nomad 6. Authentication Echo 779er. I need immediate extraction and witness protection for 2 civilians. Grid reference follows." "Who are you calling?" Sarah asked. "The only person I trust," Ben said. "My CIA handler. I wasn't just investigating for the army, Sarah. This goes beyond military corruption. Harrison was selling secrets to foreign governments, using his network to..." The first helicopter appeared over the tree line, a black shadow against the grey sky. No markings, as Ben had predicted. A rope dropped, and figures in tactical gear began fast roping down. "We're out of time," Ben said, grabbing the laptop and shoving it into Sarah's pack, along with the drives. "Into the mine." "What mine?" Ben pointed to what Sarah had thought was just a hillside. Now she saw it, an old mine entrance, partially concealed by vegetation and snow. They ran, Titan leading the way into the darkness. Behind them, boots hit the ground. Shouts, orders to stop. The mine was a maze of tunnels, decades old, probably from the gold rush era. Ben had a flashlight, but its beam barely penetrated the oppressive darkness. They moved deeper, following Titan, who seemed to know where he was going. "Dead end," Ben said, as they reached a collapse that blocked the tunnel. But Titan was pawing at a small gap near the floor. Air was coming through, fresh air. "There's another way out," Sarah realized. The gap was barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. Sarah went first, the rock tearing at her clothes and skin. Then the pack with the evidence. Ben had to help push Titan through, the dog whimpering as his injured side scraped against stone. They emerged on the other side into a natural cave system. And there, as if waiting for them, was another surprise from Michael's planning. Supplies. Food, water, weapons, even a ham radio. "He prepared for everything," Sarah said, wonder in her voice. "Not everything," a familiar voice said from the shadows. Colonel Harrison stepped into view, weapon trained on them. He wasn't alone. 3 more soldiers emerged, surrounding them. "I have to admit, Chen was thorough," Harrison said, conversationally. "But he made one mistake. He trusted the wrong person with the location of his backup site." Sarah's mind raced. Who had Michael trusted? Who else knew? "It doesn't matter," she said, her hand finding Titan's collar. "Foster's team has the evidence. The CIA has been notified. You're finished." Harrison laughed. "Foster is dead. Her backup was my team. We've been running her for months, feeding her just enough truth to keep her satisfied while we identified all the loose ends. And as for the CIA," he looked at Ben, "did you really think your handler wasn't part of this? We own people in every agency, every department. That's how we've operated for so long." Sarah felt despair crushing her. All of this, all of Michael's planning for nothing. "Kill them," Harrison ordered. "Make it look like a mine collapse." Tragic accident. Widow couldn't handle her grief, went looking for answers in dangerous places. The soldiers raised their weapons. That's when Titan made a sound Sarah had never heard before. Not quite a bark, not quite a howl. It echoed through the cave system, seeming to come from everywhere at once. And then they came. Dogs, a dozen of them, emerging from the deeper caves. Military working dogs, all bearing the scars of service, all moving with the coordinated precision of a pack that had trained together. "That's impossible," Harrison breathed. "No," Ben said, understanding dawning on his face. "The ghost dogs, the reports of MWDs appearing at bases, disappearing into the wilderness. Titan wasn't traveling alone. He was gathering the dogs from units that were ambushed, handlers who were killed by the network. They survived, and they remembered. The pack surrounded Harrison's team, teeth bared, awaiting Titan's command. "You can't be serious," Harrison said, but there was fear in his voice now. "They're just dogs." "Utah's dogs." Sarah stood, her hand still on Titan's collar. "These dogs have traveled thousands of miles. They've survived things that would kill humans. They've maintained a mission for years without handlers, without support, because that's what they were trained to do. And right now their mission is to protect the truth about what you did." One of Harrison's soldiers moved slightly, and 3 dogs immediately focused on him, growling warnings. "Call them off," Harrison demanded. "I can't," Sarah said honestly. "I'm not their handler. Titan is." And Titan, the dog who had found her in a blizzard, who had traveled across the world to complete Michael's final mission, sat perfectly still, waiting. "The evidence is already uploaded," Ben said, holding up the satellite phone. "I sent everything while we were running. CIA, FBI, media outlets, WikiLeaks. It's over, Harrison." Harrison's face contorted with rage. "You have no idea what you've done. The operations we were running, the intelligence we were gathering, you've compromised national security for your petty revenge." "No," Sarah said quietly. "We've exposed criminals who betrayed their country and murdered good soldiers for profit." Michael knew the difference between necessary secrets and criminal conspiracies. "That's why you killed him." "I didn't kill him," Harrison said. "I just didn't save him. There's a difference." "Tell that to his widow," Sarah said. Harrison looked at her with something like pity. "You think this ends with my arrest? You think the network dies with me? We're everywhere, Mrs. Chen. In every unit, every agency, every level of command. You've won a battle, not the war." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but it's a start." In the distance they heard helicopters again, but this time, Ben smiled. "Those are ours, Marine rotors, my real backup." Harrison's team looked at each other, calculating odds. 13 military dogs, all veterans, all showing teeth, an increasingly loud sound of approaching legitimate military forces, the evidence already in the hands of authorities. "Stand down," Harrison ordered his men. "We'll have our day in court." "No," one of his soldiers said. "I'm not going down for this." The soldier turned his weapon on Harrison, but before he could fire, Titan moved, not to attack, but to disarm, his jaws closing on the weapon and yanking it away with trained precision. The other dogs moved simultaneously, each targeting a weapon, using techniques they'd been taught for Rotan operations. In seconds, Harrison's team was disarmed, the dogs holding them in place with nothing more than presence and threat. "Good boy," Sarah whispered to Titan. "Good boys," she said to all of them. The Marines arrived 15 minutes later, rappelling into the cave with practiced efficiency. The officer in charge, a captain Sarah didn't recognize, surveyed the scene with amazement. "Ma'am, we're here to extract you and secure the suspects. Are you injured?" "No," Sarah said, suddenly exhausted. "Just tired, very tired." As Harrison and his team were led away in restraints, Harrison stopped beside her. "Your husband was a good soldier," he said quietly. "I didn't want to kill him, but good soldiers who can't follow the real rules get people killed." "No," Sarah said. "Good soldiers who follow illegal orders get people killed." Michael knew the difference. Sarah's. Harrison was pulled away, and Sarah finally allowed herself to collapse, sitting on a rock, while medics checked her over. Titan pressed against her side, his warmth comforting. "What happens to them?" she asked the captain, gesturing to the pack of military dogs. "I don't know," he admitted. "This is unprecedented. Officially, most of them are listed as KIA or MIA. They're heroes," Sarah said firmly. "Every one of them. They deserve better than official non-existence." The courtroom in Helena was packed beyond capacity. Media from around the world had descended on Montana for what they were calling the trial of the decade. Colonel Harrison and 17 other defendants faced charges ranging from murder to treason, and Sarah Chen was the star witness. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, wearing an official service vest for the first time in 2 years, sat Titan. The judge had made an unprecedented ruling, allowing him in the courtroom, acknowledging his status as both evidence and witness. The data extracted from his chip, with Sarah's consent as his legal guardian, had provided irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. "Mrs. Chen," the prosecutor said gently, "I know this is difficult, but can you tell the court about the last communication you received from your husband?" Sarah touched the letter in her pocket, the one from the ranger station. She'd read it so many times she had it memorized, but she pulled it out anyway, needing to hold it. "May I read it?" she asked. The judge nodded. Sarah unfolded the worn paper, her hands steady despite the tears she could feel building. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then Titan found you, and I'm gone. I'm so sorry, my love. Sorry for the secrets. Sorry for the danger I've put you in, and most of all, sorry for breaking my promise to come home to you. By now you know the truth about what's been happening here. Good men are dying because of greed and corruption. I couldn't stand by and watch. You always said my need to be a hero would get me killed. You were right as usual. But here's what I need you to know. Titan isn't just evidence. He's I's promise to you. I've trained him, prepared him, for one mission above all others, to protect you, not just from Harrison and his network, but from the loneliness I know you'll feel. He's been my brother here, my confidant, the one who kept me sane when the world went crazy. Now he's yours. The other dogs, if Titan managed to find them, they're all heroes. Their handlers died trying to do the right thing. Please make sure they're honored, not forgotten. I know you'll want justice for me, and you should fight for it. But don't let that fight consume you. Live, Sarah. Love again. Be happy. That's an order from your sergeant. All my love. Always. Michael P.S. Titan's favorite spot to be scratched is behind his left ear. He'll pretend he's too tough for it, but he'll lean into it every time. He snores when he's really comfortable. And sometimes when he thinks no one is watching, he still chases his tail like a puppy. Love him for me. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of muffled crying from the gallery. Even Harrison, Sarah noticed, had looked away. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," the prosecutor said after a moment. No further questions. The defense attorney stood, but before he could speak, Titan stood as well, placing himself between the man and Sarah. Not threatening, just present, protective. "It's okay, buddy," Sarah whispered, using Michael's nickname for him. The defense attorney, wisely, kept his distance. "Mrs. Chen, you never actually saw my client harm your husband, did you?" "No," Sarah admitted, "but Titan did. The dog can't testify, Mrs. Chen." "No, but his memories can. The chip recorded everything. Colonel Harrison giving the orders. The deliberately falsified intelligence about the patrol route. The confirmation signal after the IED exploded. Your client might not have pressed the trigger, but he orchestrated every detail of my husband's murder, allegedly," the lawyer said. "On video," Sarah countered. "With audio, with biometric data confirming Harrison's identity, stress levels indicating deception, and timestamp data that's been verified by 3 independent forensic teams." The lawyer had no response to that. After her testimony, Sarah stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters but feeling utterly alone despite the crowd. Ben was testifying next, and the other survivors. Foster had lived, barely, and was appearing via video link from her hospital bed, would follow. "Mrs. Chen, what's next for you and Titan? Will you be keeping all the dogs? Is it true Netflix wants to make a series about this?" Sarah ignored them all, walking to the small park across from the courthouse where the pack was waiting. 13 military working dogs, all sitting in perfect formation despite having no handler commanding them. They'd been staying at a ranch outside town that had volunteered to house them during the trial, but they always seemed to know when Sarah was coming. She sat on a bench, and immediately the formation broke. The dogs surrounded her, some pressing close for comfort, others maintaining watch positions, all of them accepting her as their de facto pack leader through Titan. There was Rex, a Belgian Malinois with half an ear missing, Scout, a German shepherd who'd lost an eye to shrapnel, Luna, the only female in the pack, a Dutch shepherd who still favored her front left leg. Each of them had a story, a handler they'd lost, a journey they'd survived. "What am I going to do with all of you?" she asked them. They looked at her with trusting eyes, and she knew she couldn't separate them. They'd found each other across impossible distances, created their own unit when the human one failed them. They were family now. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Check the news." She pulled up a news app and gasped. The headline read, "Pentagon announces full investigation, 31 more arrests in military corruption scandal." The network was unraveling. Harrison had been right that it was extensive, but he'd been wrong about it surviving exposure. The evidence from Titan and Michael's careful documentation had started an avalanche that was cleaning out corruption at every level. But that wasn't what made her cry. It was the smaller story below it. Congress passes emergency bill surviving military dogs granted full veteran status and benefits. The dogs who'd been officially dead or missing were now recognized as the heroes they were. They'd receive medical care, support, and most importantly, acknowledgement of their service. "You did it, Michael," she whispered. "You saved them all." The ranch sprawled across 200 acres of Montana wilderness, complete with training facilities, medical buildings, and housing for both dogs and humans. The sign at the entrance read, "Chen Center for Military Working Dogs Rehabilitation, Retirement, and Remembrance." Sarah stood in the main training field, watching as a young veteran named Marcus worked with Rex on basic obedience. Marcus had lost his left leg to an IED. Rex had lost his handler to the same explosion. Now they were healing each other. The funding had come from everywhere: Congress, private donations, a massive GoFundMe that had raised millions in days. Even some of the military contractors, who'd been unknowingly working with Harrison's network, had contributed, desperate to distance from the scandal. Sarah then called from the main building, "You need to see this." She jogged over, Titan keeping pace beside her. In the office, Ben had a video call up on the computer. It was Foster, finally out of the hospital and back on active duty. "Hey, Sarah," Foster said, smiling. "I wanted you to be the first to know." Harrison flipped. Full cooperation in exchange for life instead of death penalty. He's giving up everyone. Names, dates, operations, bank accounts. The whole network is coming down. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was. Closure. "That's good," she said simply. "That's what Michael would have wanted." "There's more," Foster said. "The Army wants to posthumously promote Michael to Master Sergeant, and they want to award Titan the Medal of Honor. He'd be only the second dog in history to receive it." Sarah looked at Titan, who was lying by her feet, finally able to rest without constantly watching for threats. "I think Michael would have liked that," she said. After the call ended, Sarah walked through the facility. In the medical wing, Dr. Patterson, who'd driven up from town to volunteer his services, was treating Scout's chronic pain. In the residence hall, 3 more veterans who'd arrived that week were settling in, each paired with one of the pack dogs for mutual support. She ended up at the memorial wall they'd built in the main hall. Michael's photo was there, along with the photos of all the handlers who'd died, the ones the pack dogs had lost. Below each photo was a small plaque with their name, rank, and a simple phrase, "They served with honor." "I have something to tell you," she said to Michael's photo. It was a habit she'd developed, talking to him here. Titan always came with her, sitting quietly while she spoke. "I got a call from the adoption agency today, the one we'd started paperwork with before you deployed. They have a little girl, 2 years old. Her parents were both soldiers, killed in a car accident. No family to take her." She touched the photo gently. "I said yes. I know we always talked about having kids together, but I think you'd understand. This place needs life, not just healing, and I think I'm ready to be happy again, like you ordered." Titan made a soft sound, almost like approval. Her name is Hope, Sarah continued. I think you would have loved that. Always finding meaning in names, weren't you? She heard footsteps and turned to find Marcus, the young veteran, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, ma'am, but Rex and I finished our session, and I wanted to ask, could you tell me more about what they were like? The handler, Rex won't respond to the name his file says, and I thought maybe if I knew more about who he lost. Sarah smiled. Of course. Let me get the journals. She'd been collecting stories from anyone who'd known the fallen handlers, compiling histories for each dog. It helped the new veterans understand their partners better, helped the dogs hear familiar words and memories, even if from different voices. As she walked with Marcus, telling him about Staff Sergeant Wimmers, Rex's handler, she noticed something. The young man was walking straighter, his prosthetic leg seeming less of a burden. Rex was walking perfectly at heel, but kept glancing up at Marcus with something that looked like hope. They were all healing, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. The little girl's laughter echoed across the training field as she ran, chased by 3 of the gentler dogs who'd learned to play carefully with her. Hope had arrived 6 months ago, a tiny, solemn thing who'd barely spoken for the first week. Now she was the queen of the ranch, with 13 massive guard dogs who would face down death itself to protect her. Sarah watched from the porch of the main house, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The Montana morning was crisp, but not cold, spring finally winning its battle against winter. Beside her, Titan lay on his special bed, his muzzle now showing gray that hadn't been there before. Getting old, aren't we, buddy? She said, scratching behind his left ear. He leaned into it, just as Michael had promised he would. The ranch had grown beyond her wildest dreams. They now housed 30 dogs and had helped twice that many find permanent homes with veterans who needed them. The waiting list was months long, but Sarah interviewed every applicant personally, matching dogs and humans with the same care Michael had used in planning his mission. Ben emerged from the medical building with Dr. Patterson. In a surprise to everyone, including themselves, they'd started dating 6 months ago. Ben had decided to stay on as the ranch's operations manager, using his military logistics experience to keep everything running smoothly. He still walked with a slight limp from wounds Sarah hadn't even known about until recently, but he was healing too. Morning briefing in 10, he called to her. It was their daily routine, reviewing which dogs were ready for adoption, which veterans were arriving for the program, what training exercises were scheduled. It gave structure to days that could otherwise blur together in their peacefulness. But this morning would be different. Sarah had news. Once the staff had gathered in the meeting room, 8 full-time employees now, plus a dozen volunteers, Sarah stood, Titan automatically moving to stand beside her. Before we start the regular briefing, she said, I have an announcement. Yesterday I received a call from the Secretary of Defense. The room went quiet. They want to expand our program, full federal funding, locations in 5 states, official partnership with the VA. We'd become the national model for military working dog rehabilitation and veteran pairing. The room erupted in celebration, but Sarah held up her hand. I haven't given them an answer yet. This place, what we've built, it's personal. It's Michael's legacy. If we expand, we lose some control. It becomes a program, not a mission. What did Michael always say? Ben asked quietly. About missions? Sarah smiled, remembering, a good soldier knows when a personal mission needs to become something bigger than themselves. So, Dr. Patterson prompted, so I said I'd agree on 3 conditions. 1, the original ranch remains under our direct control. 2, every facility follows our protocols exactly. No shortcuts, no bureaucratic interference. And 3, she paused, looking at Titan. The program is officially named the Sergeant Michael Chen Memorial Working Dog Initiative. And they agreed? Ben asked. They agreed. The celebration this time was unrestrained. As Sarah watched her team, her family, really rejoicing, she felt Michael's presence strongly, not in a ghostly way, but in the permanence of what they'd built. His death had exposed corruption, saved lives, and now would help hundreds of dogs and veterans heal together. Hope toddled into the room, having escaped from the daycare area again. She made a beeline for Titan, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Titan, she said, her pronunciation still developing. Love Titan, the massive dog who'd traveled 8,000 miles through war zones and wilderness, who'd carried military secrets in his head and brought down a criminal network, gently licked the toddler's face, his tail wagging. The ranch was transformed. Red, white and blue bunting hung from every building. A platform had been erected in the main field. Hundreds of chairs were filled with veterans, families, military officials and media from around the world. Sarah stood on the platform in a black dress, Hope in her arms, wearing a tiny dress uniform that the wives of Michael's unit had sent. Titan sat beside them, his coat brushed to a shine, wearing his service vest with its new addition, the Medal of Honor that would be presented today. The Secretary of Defense spoke about valor and sacrifice. Generals discussed the importance of military working dogs, but Sarah barely heard any of it. She was looking at the crowd, at all the faces that had been touched by this journey. Foster was there, walking with a cane but walking. The veterans from the program, each with their adopted dog sitting perfectly at heel. The families of the fallen handlers, finally able to see that their loved ones' partners had survived and thrived. Even some of the soldiers who testified against Harrison, finding their own redemption in truth. When it came time for Titan to receive his medal, Sarah knelt beside him. The Secretary of Defense read the citation, "For extraordinary heroism and service beyond the call of duty. Military working dog, Titan distinguished himself by traveling over 8,000 miles through hostile territory to complete his handler's final mission, gathering evidence that exposed corruption and saved countless lives, and continuing to serve even after official military separation. His actions reflect the highest traditions of military service and the unbreakable bond between handler and dog." As the medal was placed around Titan's neck, the crowd rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah saw that many were crying too. She was crying. Hope was crying, though probably just because everyone else was, and even Ben was wiping his eyes. But Titan sat perfectly still, looking out at the crowd with those intelligent amber eyes. Then, in a move that wasn't in any ceremony protocol, he turned to the memorial wall visible through the open doors of the main building, to Michael's photo, and lay down in the position military dogs take when their handler falls, the ultimate sign of respect and mourning. The applause stopped, the entire crowd fell silent. And in that silence, Sarah heard it, felt it, really. Not Michael's voice, but his presence, his pride, his love. The mission was complete, but the work would continue. Dogs and humans healing together, finding new purpose after loss, creating family from tragedy. "Get up, buddy," she whispered to Titan. "We've got work to do." Titan rose, shook himself, and looked up at her, with what she swore was a smile. Hope reached out from Sarah's arms, patting Titan's head with her small hand. "Good dog," the toddler said clearly. "Good Titan." Sarah stood in the same spot where she'd once found Titan dying in the snow. The cabin had been renovated, expanded, turned into a retreat center for Gold Star families, families who'd lost someone in military service. But this spot, this exact spot, she'd kept marked with a simple stone bearing an inscription, "Where Hope was found." "Mum, Mum," Hope, now 7 and racing around with the endless energy of childhood, came running up the path. "Uncle Ben says the new dogs are here." Behind her, keeping pace despite his age, came Titan. He was completely grey now, moving slowly but still insisting on following Hope everywhere. The vet said he probably only had a few months left. His body was finally giving in to all the trauma it had endured, but his spirit remained strong. "I'm coming, sweetheart," Sarah called. "Tell Uncle Ben we'll be right there." Hope ran off, and Sarah knelt beside Titan, who had stopped to rest. You don't have to keep going, you know, she told him gently. You've done enough. More than enough. Titan looked at her with those amber eyes, still intelligent, still determined. Then he looked in the direction Hope had run, and his message was clear. Not yet. She still needs me. They walked together to the intake facility, where 15 new dogs had just arrived. These were from a forward operating base that was closing, their handlers rotating home. The military had started sending dogs to them proactively now, before they became casualties of budget cuts or bureaucracy. As Sarah began evaluating the new arrivals, she noticed one hanging back, a young German shepherd, probably only 2 years old, with markings remarkably similar to Titan's from that long-ago photo with Michael. What's his story? She asked the transport coordinator. Her, actually named Valkyrie. Handler was killed in Syria 3 months ago. She's been difficult. Won't work with anyone else, won't eat much. The base vet said she's grieving. Sarah approached slowly the way Michael had taught her in his letters about working with traumatized dogs. Valkyrie watched her warily, ready to bolt or bite. Then Titan moved forward, approaching the young dog with the authority that had nothing to do with size or strength, and everything to do with experience. He sniffed her, then did something extraordinary. He play-bowed, the universal dog sign for friendship, something Sarah hadn't seen him do in years. Valkyrie, shocked out of her grief for a moment, tentatively bowed back. Well, would you look at that? Ben said, having arrived with Hope. The old man still got it. Over the next weeks, Titan took Valkyrie under his protection, teaching her through example how to trust again, how to work again, how to live with loss, but not be consumed by it. It was like watching Michael train new soldiers, patient and firm, and endlessly caring. One morning, Sarah woke to find Titan hadn't come in from his usual dawn patrol of the grounds. She found him by the memorial wall, lying beneath Michael's photo. Valkyrie was curled against him, and Hope was there too, having somehow known to come. Is he? Hope asked, her voice small. Sarah checked. Titan was still breathing, but barely. She sat beside him, cradling his massive head in her lap. It's okay, buddy, she whispered. You can go. Michael's waiting for you. Titan's eyes opened one last time, finding first Hope, then Valkyrie, then Sarah. His tail gave one weak thump. Then, with a soft sigh that sounded almost content, he was gone. They buried him beside the memorial wall, with full military honors. The Secretary of Defense came personally. Veterans from across the country who'd been helped by the program attended, the entire pack. Those still alive sat in formation. One last time, Hope, trying to be brave but crying anyway, placed Titan's Medal of Honor on his grave. He was the best dog, she said simply. He saved everybody. Sarah held her daughter, looking at the 2 photos now on the memorial wall, Michael and Titan, side by side, forever watching over the ranch. Yes, she said, they both did. Sarah Chen Rodriguez, she'd married Ben 3 years after Titan's passing, knowing Michael would have approved, stood before Congress, testifying about the Military Working Dog Protection Act. Her hair showed silver now, and laugh lines had replaced the grief lines around her eyes. These dogs aren't equipment, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak. They're veterans. They've saved more lives than we can count, carried secrets that protected our nation, and continued serving even after their handlers fell. They deserve more than being abandoned when their usefulness ends. The act would pass unanimously, guaranteeing every military working dog a retirement home, medical care, and recognition of their service. It would be known as Titan's Law. Hope, now 17 and headed to West Point in the fall, watched from the gallery with Valkyrie, now her dog, trained as her service animal for the PTSD she'd developed from losing her parents so young. The cycle continued, healing flowing from one generation to the next. The Chen Center now operated in 12 states, had reunited over 3,000 dogs with veterans and had become the global model for military working dog care. Michael's death had started something that saved thousands of lives, both human and canine. After the testimony, Sarah walked through Arlington National Cemetery to a special section that had been created for military working dogs. Titan's memorial was there. He couldn't be buried there, but he was remembered there, along with dozens of others who'd served. She placed a small stone on his memorial, a Jewish tradition Ben had taught her for honoring the dead. On the stone she'd written a single word: complete. The mission Michael had given Titan to protect her, to expose the truth, to save his fellow dogs, had been accomplished beyond anything they could have imagined. But more than that, Titan had taught her something Michael had tried to tell her in his last letter: that love doesn't end with death, that purpose can be found in the deepest grief, and that sometimes the most unlikely saviors come on 4 legs, with muddy paws and hearts bigger than their bodies. As she walked back to where Ben and Hope waited, Valkyrie alert at Hope's side, Sarah felt them with her, Michael and Titan, not as ghosts, but as the permanent changes they'd made in the world. Every dog saved, every veteran healed, every truth told was their legacy continuing. In the distance, she could hear dogs barking at one of the center's facilities nearby, not in distress but in play. New dogs arriving, new veterans finding hope, new connections being made. The work continued. It would always continue. And somewhere, she liked to think, a soldier and his dog were watching, tails wagging at least one of them, finally at peace. The frozen giant dog she'd fed on that desperate winter night had turned out to be more than a lost animal. He'd been a messenger, a guardian, a bridge between the living and the dead, between truth and lies, between despair and hope. He'd been exactly what Michael had promised, not just evidence, but family. The young widow who'd saved him had been saved in return, transformed from a woman frozen in grief to someone who'd changed laws, exposed corruption, and built something beautiful from the ashes of loss. She'd learned that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are true, that love takes many forms, and that heroes don't always walk on 2 legs. Some of them have 4 paws, a loyal heart, and the determination to travel 8,000 miles to keep a promise. Some of them are named Titan, and some of them change the world simply by refusing to let the darkness win. Thank you, Sarah whispered to the wind, to the memory, to the love that had started it all. Thank you both. Then she walked forward into her life, full, meaningful, and forever marked by the night she'd chosen to save a freezing giant dog, not knowing he had come to save her too. The circle was complete. The story in all its unbelievable truth was told. And somewhere in Montana, at a ranch where broken souls found healing, a new dog arrived, scared and lost and grieving. But waiting there was a community built on love and loss, and the unbreakable bonds between warriors, both human and canine. They would heal together as so many had before them, because that's what Michael Chen had really left behind. Not just evidence of crimes or justice for his death, but a living legacy of healing that would outlast them all. And Titan had carried that legacy 8,000 miles through hell itself to deliver it. The mission at last was truly complete, but the love would go on forever.